They thought he was just another lost cause, a wounded veteran, left freezing on a city sidewalk, no home, no hope, no one willing to stop. But a German shepherd named Rex refused to walk away. In a single night, the lives of 3 strangers would entwine: a broken soldier, a determined cop, and a dog whose loyalty knew no bounds. What happened next restored a town's faith in justice and proved that real heroes don't always wear uniforms. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you believe in the power of second chances, if you believe people and animals alike deserve compassion, hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to hear might just change how you see the world. The wind howled down Main Street like a warning no one wanted to hear. It was January in the city of Evanston, Illinois, and the world outside looked half drowned in snow and darkness. A layer of ice gripped the cracked sidewalks, each street lamp haloed in frost, their yellow pools of light stretching through the cold. It was the kind of night that made even stray cats vanish and set empty bottles rolling like ghosts across the curb. Officer Daniel Hayes steered his patrol car slowly down the deserted avenue, wipers clicking, heater humming. Daniel was 36, with the kind of solid, broad-shouldered build that suggested he'd been an athlete once, though his belly was softer now, and his hands bore calluses more from paperwork than from push-ups. His jaw was square, dusted with the beginnings of a beard he never quite had time to shave, and his blue-gray eyes looked tired but honest beneath the brim of his Navy police cap. But what stood out most tonight wasn't Daniel. It was his partner. In the passenger seat sat Rex, a German shepherd of striking bearing, 9 years old, thick black and tan fur dusted with gray at the muzzle, right ear nicked from an old injury, eyes an amber gold that caught the dashboard lights and seemed almost to glow. Rex was the department's most seasoned canine, famous in Evanston for his sharp instincts and quieter, gentler side. There were officers who joked that Rex could sniff out guilt in a heartbeat, but what they never said aloud was that, for many, Rex was also the department's heart. The origin of Rex's name was whispered among the precinct with a kind of reverence. Years ago, after Daniel's rookie partner and Rex's first handler, Officer Tom Reed, was killed during a domestic disturbance call gone wrong, the dog had lain for hours beside Tom's locker, refusing food or comfort, until Daniel, who was there the night Tom died, took a chance and sat with him in the dark. Tom had called his childhood dog Rex, too. Daniel had found the name engraved inside Tom's old wristwatch, the one that Rex wore now on his collar as a tag. When Daniel was assigned as Rex's new handler, the first thing he'd done was kneel, scratch the dog's ruff, and say, "We'll do this together, Rex," for Tom. Since then, the two had become a legend of sorts, one man carrying a friend's promise, one dog carrying a name that meant never giving up. Tonight, as their patrol car crawled past shuttered shops and snow-stilled traffic, Rex sat upright, nose twitching at the glass. The police radio fizzed with static. Daniel was making a mental list of the places he needed to check before midnight when Rex suddenly whined a sharp, anxious sound. He pawed at the window, ears pricked. Daniel, trained never to ignore his partner's signals, slowed and rolled down the window. The cold bit his cheeks instantly. There, across the street, under the flicker of a busted neon sign outside MacArthur's pharmacy, a figure lay sprawled on the sidewalk. Daniel's eyes narrowed. It was a man, bundled in what looked like a suit jacket, but the fabric was stained, and the man's hatless head lay half buried in snow. A bottle gleamed nearby, half empty, rolling against the curb. Daniel's first instinct was disappointment. Another drunk, he thought. Another problem no one wanted to claim. But Rex let out a low, urgent bark and pushed at the door. Daniel's pulse quickened. He parked and stepped out, boots crunching through snow. Rex trotted beside him, body tense, hackles slightly raised, not in aggression, but in focus. As they drew near, Daniel saw that the man was black, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with a broad face half hidden by a week's worth of beard, lips cracked from cold. Blood had dried on his temple, stark against the snow. His suit jacket was good wool, or had been, though the cuffs were frayed and one sleeve was torn. The smell of whiskey lingered, but underneath it was something sharper. Fear. Daniel knelt. "Sir? Hey, can you hear me?" The man didn't stir. Daniel checked for a pulse thready, but there. Rex sniffed at the man's gloved hand, whined, and then circled him, tail stiff. When Daniel tried to stand, Rex blocked him, fixing him with that fierce, expectant stare. "What is it, boy?" Daniel murmured, scanning for more injuries. Then he saw it. A patch of blood, half frozen, spreading from beneath the man's side. Not just a drunk, he realized. Someone had hit him, or he'd fallen badly. The city's bitterness had teeth, and this man was caught in its jaws. Daniel called in for an ambulance, radio voice steady despite his racing thoughts. While they waited, Rex lay beside the man, pressing his warm body against the cold. When the man shivered, Rex nudged closer, resting his head protectively over the man's shoulder. The ambulance arrived minutes later, sirens low, wheels spitting slush. As the medics lifted the man onto a stretcher, he half opened his eyes, mumbling something that sounded like, "Don't leave me, Rex." Daniel blinked, startled. Had the man somehow heard the dog's name, or did fate have a sense of irony tonight? Rex whined softly and pressed his nose to the man's gloved fist as he was loaded into the ambulance. As Daniel filled out the report, a movement in the second-floor window across the street caught his eye. There, face pressed to the glass, was a little girl, maybe 10 or 11, with wild brown curls and wide, hopeful eyes. She watched everything, breath misting the pain. That was April Johnson, Daniel realized. Her family lived above the laundromat. April's mother, Lisa, was a waitress who worked late shifts, struggling to pay off debts since her husband left 2 years ago. April watched the scene below in awe. She'd always dreamed of having a dog like Rex, brave, loyal, a hero in the night. She imagined Rex bursting into her life, chasing away the shadows that lingered at her door, especially on nights when the landlord came knocking about overdue rent, or her mother returned home tired and silent. Down below, Daniel and Rex watched as the ambulance drove off, lights swirling blue and red through the falling snow. Daniel knelt and hugged Rex, running a gloved hand along the dog's strong neck. "Good work, partner," he whispered. "You saved a life tonight." Rex licked the salt from his cheek and wagged his tail, then stood tall, alert to the world, a sentinel against the cold. For one moment, Main Street felt less empty, less forgotten. Somewhere above, April pressed her palm to the glass and wished, fiercely, that the world was always this brave. Morning broke gray and thin over Evanston, laying a pale sheen on the city's crusted snowbanks and window panes. Inside the small, perpetually overheated local hospital, Bernard Carter woke to the slow, stinging realization of pain. He tried to shift but groaned. His ribs felt like they'd been stamped on. Through the blinding white of overhead lights, he could just make out 2 blurry shapes, a nurse and, surprisingly, a large German shepherd lying quietly at the foot of his bed. The nurse, Ms. Patricia Evans, was a woman in her early 50s with a formidable presence. She had skin the color of honey, laugh lines etched deep from years of difficult shifts, and wore her salt and pepper hair in a tightly braided bun. She was efficient, no nonsense, but her voice, when she spoke to her patients, always carried a mother's care. "Mr. Carter, you're safe," she said, adjusting his blanket and checking his IV. "You gave us quite a scare." Bernard tried to speak, but only managed to croak. Patricia pressed a cup of water to his lips. "Take it slow." Daniel Hayes, meanwhile, stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded, his police badge glinting in the light. He hadn't left since the ambulance dropped them off a few hours earlier. Daniel's face was all lines and fatigue, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was gentle. "You remember anything about last night?" Bernard looked at the police officer, then at the dog. He managed a faint nod. "The dog, he didn't leave me." Daniel smiled, rubbing Rex's ear. "That's Rex. He's not much for letting people go." Patricia finished her checks and excused herself, promising to return with breakfast and more painkillers. Daniel took the moment to sit in the vinyl chair, eyeing Bernard with the calm focus of a man used to long silences. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "You lost a lot of blood. Doc said if you'd been out there another hour, you might not have made it." Bernard stared at the ceiling, ashamed. "Did I cause any trouble?" "No," Daniel answered, almost too quickly. "You survived. That's all that matters." The hospital room was silent except for the hum of the radiator and Rex's breathing. Bernard couldn't help but notice the scars on Rex's muzzle, the gray dusting around his eyes. He reached out hesitantly, and Rex pressed his head into Bernard's hand, tail thumping the linoleum. Daniel watched, something softening in his expression. "You a dog person?" "Used to be," Bernard replied. "Back before everything." The way he said it, so quietly, told Daniel not to push. Patricia returned with a breakfast tray, oatmeal, a boiled egg, toast. She set it down and fussed, muttering about the system and men freezing in the street. Daniel chuckled. Patricia runs this ward like a ship. We all know better than to get in her way. Patricia snorted, but there was affection in her eyes as she glanced at Bernard. Eat up, no heroics until you've got strength back. Then she was gone, leaving them in her wake. By late morning, the hospital was busy with visitors and staff, but Daniel lingered. Officially, his shift had ended at sunrise, but he filled out paperwork in the corner and watched over Bernard all the same. Bernard, still weak but grateful, ate his food and asked for news. Daniel ran through the basics. You're Bernard Carter, right? ID in your wallet, former military, address listed as a shelter, but they say you haven't been there in months. Bernard looked away, shame clouding his eyes. Got tired of being a charity case, he muttered. Didn't want to be a burden. Daniel hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at him. How'd you end up out there last night? Bernard took a long breath, as if bracing himself. Used to have a place. Work, too. After the war, I tried to stand up for people filed complaints when the landlord started pushing out old tenants. Then, suddenly, lost my job, my lease, my reputation. Guess it's easier to get rid of troublemakers. He gave a humorless laugh. I was angry, drank too much. Some guys came after me last week, said I should mind my business. Daniel listened in silence. He'd heard stories like this before, but every time it hit different. Down at the police station, April Johnson was on a mission. She wore her favorite red knit hat, mittens mismatched, eyes bright with anticipation. In her arms, carefully wrapped in a towel for warmth, was a bag of cinnamon rolls she'd begged her mom to let her bring. Lisa Johnson, April's mother, was short and slender with tired eyes and a gentle smile. She worked the night shift at a diner, but always made time for April's small kindnesses. You be careful, April, and thank the officer for last night. April nodded solemnly as if heading into battle. The station was warmer than April expected, and filled with the busy sounds of phones ringing, radios chirping, boots on tile. She found Daniel and Rex at the front desk. Daniel looked surprised, then amused, as April presented her gift with a proud flourish. These are for Rex. And for you too, I guess, she added shyly. Rex's tail wagged, and Daniel grinned, offering a chair. Thank you, April. Rex loves cinnamon, don't you, buddy? Rex, ever the professional, sat politely but licked his lips. April couldn't help glancing at the closed office door beyond, where Bernard's name had already started drifting through the rumor mill. Is the man you saved okay? She asked. Daniel nodded. He's recovering. You've got good timing. He'll need all the support he can get. April sat quietly for a moment, hugging her knees to her chest. He looked so cold last night. I wish I could help. Daniel, watching her, realized she wasn't just talking about Bernard. There was worry in her voice, worry for her mother and herself, for all the people in their neighborhood who felt invisible. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Bernard drifted in and out of sleep. Late that night, the halls were quiet except for the faint echo of nurses' shoes and the distant coughs of other patients. Daniel, still on watch, he'd told the new shift he was waiting for important papers, though really he just couldn't leave, read through a folder in the waiting room. Rex curled up on the floor, ears twitching. At 2:30 a.m., the peace shattered. Rex jerked awake, lips curled in a low growl. From down the hall, the sound of soft footsteps approached Bernard's room. Daniel stood, adrenaline surging. Through the window, he saw a shadowed figure in hospital scrubs, face masked, pushing a cleaning cart. But the way the man moved was wrong, too cautious, eyes darting. Rex tensed, hackles up, a silent warning. Daniel signaled to the nurse's station and stepped into the hallway just as the figure slipped into Bernard's room. Inside, Bernard was half awake, confused. The intruder pulled a syringe from his pocket. But before he could get close, Rex shot into the room with a bark that split the night. Daniel was right behind. The man spun, panicked, and tried to run, but Rex blocked the door, baring his teeth, eyes fixed. Daniel pinned the attacker in moments, radioing for backup. The hospital night staff arrived in a flurry, Patricia among them, fierce and fuming. The would-be assassin was dragged away, kicking, but the damage had been averted. Bernard, trembling, realized just how close he'd come to vanishing forever, saved again, by the unlikely team of a stubborn cop and an even more stubborn dog. The next morning, as Bernard nursed a mug of hospital coffee, Daniel pulled up a chair. "Looks like you've got more enemies than you thought." Bernard managed a weak smile. "Lucky for me, I've got friends too." Rex sat by his side, watchful and loyal as ever. Sunlight sliced through the gray clouds over Evanston, melting patches of old snow into slush along the hospital drive. Inside, the world seemed quieter after the chaos of the night before. Bernard Carter sat propped up in his bed, wrapped in a thin hospital blanket, staring out the window with eyes that seemed both ancient and uncertain. He looked older in the daylight, deep lines scoring his cheeks, a salt and pepper beard growing in uneven patches, hair close-cropped but now unruly from days on the street. His body was lean, almost gaunt, a result of too many missed meals, but his shoulders still held the memory of a soldier's discipline. Daniel Hayes sat nearby, not in uniform but in an old flannel shirt, blue jeans and hiking boots that marked him as an off-duty cop who never really stopped working. He was drinking cheap hospital coffee, his badge resting in his breast pocket, a silent reassurance to Bernard. Rex, always a presence, lounged beside Bernard's bed, his thick coat brushed and gleaming from the nurse's attention, ears perked as if he could sense the heaviness in the room. Daniel waited, patient, for Bernard to speak. Eventually, Bernard's voice broke the silence, rough, low, but steady. "I used to be somebody, you know." He looked at Daniel with haunted eyes. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, saw things I can't ever forget. Came back and the world kept spinning, but not for me." Daniel nodded, his face open and free of judgment. "What happened, Bernard?" Bernard's hands trembled as he picked at a thread on the blanket. "I found work as a property manager, helping low-income veterans and families find housing. I thought I could do some good, but the company Evanston Redevelopment Partners wasn't what it pretended to be." He swallowed hard. "They bought up whole blocks, forced out tenants, claimed it was revitalization, but all it did was line pockets. The people I was supposed to help, they were losing their homes." Rex shifted closer, pressing his head against Bernard's leg as if to steady him. Bernard smiled faintly, grateful for the silent comfort. "I spoke up, wrote letters, filed complaints. I tried to get the city council to listen, especially to one man, Charles Oxley. He's the kind who shakes every hand with a smile, but he's poison underneath. He owned the firm's lawyers, had city officials in his pocket." Bernard's voice broke into a bitter laugh. "You can guess what happened next." Daniel's jaw tightened. "They made an example out of you." Bernard nodded. "Fired me. Blacklisted me. Word spread quick I was trouble, a disgruntled vet with a chip on his shoulder. People stopped calling. Even the shelters started looking the other way. The last time I tried to report, I got jumped behind a bar by 2 men who told me I was done asking questions. After that, I started drinking, just to stop feeling like a ghost." He looked at Daniel. "They made sure I lost everything except the guilt." Daniel leaned forward. "But you didn't give up. You kept fighting, Bernard, even if you were alone." Bernard met his gaze, something like pride flickering in his eyes for the first time in months. Outside the hospital, the day was crawling toward noon. April Johnson, wrapped in her oversized red coat and dragging a battered backpack, made her way home from school through icy slush. She was thin, with lively brown eyes and a hopeful air that stubbornly refused to dim, no matter how often the world tried. Her hair was tied in 2 messy braids, woolen mittens full of holes. As she rounded the corner to her apartment, she spotted a white envelope wedged into the old brass mailbox. No stamp, just the word Lisa, scrawled in blocky handwriting. April pulled it out, glancing up and down the hallway. The air smelled faintly of bleach and cold pasta. She slipped inside and found her mother, Lisa, at the tiny kitchen table, rubbing her forehead over a pile of bills. Lisa Johnson was a small woman, wiry and quick, with soft brown skin, tired eyes, and a smile that only ever appeared for April. She worked double shifts at the diner and often came home limping, but she never once complained about her luck. April handed her the envelope. Lisa opened it and read silently, her face growing pale. "What is it, Mama?" April asked, voice small. Lisa hesitated, then handed the letter to her daughter. It was short, just a few lines. "Pay what you owe by the 15th, or get out. No second chances. You've been warned." Lisa shook her head, trying to muster a smile. "Just someone trying to scare us, honey. Don't worry." But April saw the fear in her mother's eyes, a fear that no amount of forced cheer could hide. The threat felt real, like a hand closing slowly around their lives. That afternoon, Daniel returned to the station. He passed through the bullpen, nodding to his partner, Officer Pete Rodriguez, a stout, energetic man with close-cropped hair and a fondness for corny jokes. Pete was known for his big laugh, but today he looked worried. "Everything all right with the vet?" Pete asked. Daniel shrugged. "He's been through hell. He needs someone to believe him." Pete grunted. "This town's full of stories like his, but not many make it out." In the hospital, Bernard was visited by a new face, a woman named Judith Morrow, a volunteer from the city's veteran advocacy group. Judith was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore her white hair in a ponytail. Her voice was gentle but firm, her handshake solid. She sat by Bernard's bed, introduced herself, and listened as he poured out his story again, this time with more details. Judith took careful notes, promising to look into Oxley's company and the complaints Bernard had filed. "You're not alone anymore," she told him. Bernard wanted to believe her. Meanwhile, April sat in her tiny bedroom, studying the threatening letter. She decided to keep it safe, hiding it inside her favorite book, the same one she always brought to the library on Saturdays. She made up her mind to ask Daniel for help, even if it scared her. After all, she'd seen what Rex could do, and she knew good people didn't give up. As evening fell, the hospital quieted. Daniel checked in one last time, pausing at Bernard's bedside. "You're not invisible, Bernard," he said quietly. "We'll get you through this. That's a promise." Rex wagged his tail, settling down at Bernard's feet for the night. Bernard stared out the window, watching the city lights blur in the darkness. For the first time in a long while, hope thin and trembling dared to spark inside him. Clouds pressed low over Evanston as evening crept in, the city glowing in pools of orange and blue beneath battered streetlights. At the small, cluttered office Daniel used at the police station, the air was thick with the smell of old coffee, damp coats, and paper. Daniel Hayes hunched over his desk, reviewing stacks of property records and official complaints, his brow furrowed in concentration. His navy uniform jacket was slung over the chair, revealing the sleeves of a plaid shirt rolled to his elbows. Daniel had the look of a man who rarely rested, a bruise under one eye, hair in need of a trim, and stubbornness set deep into every line of his face. Across from him sat Bernard Carter, posture straighter than days before, his skin still sallow but eyes clearer, focused. There was resolve in the way he spoke, and though pain lingered around his ribs, he seemed more himself. His khakis and borrowed sweater, a bit too big, couldn't disguise the old dignity he carried. Rex sprawled beneath the desk, his tail thumping lightly whenever Bernard's hand drifted to scratch his ears. The German Shepherd's presence seemed to fill the room with a sense of safety and vigilance. Daniel pushed a stack of files toward Bernard. "You recognize any of these names?" Bernard scanned them, lips pressed tight. "Yes, here, and here. These families were all pushed out. Some fought back, but most couldn't afford lawyers. They ended up on the street." Daniel made notes, circling addresses and dates. "And Oxley's name pops up everywhere," he muttered, eyes narrowing. "It's always Oxley." Meanwhile, outside, April Johnson hovered in the vestibule, clutching her worn backpack to her chest. She was determined, her brown eyes shining with a stubborn hope. Today she wore her lucky yellow raincoat 2 sizes too big, frayed at the cuffs over a faded hoodie. In her hands she held an envelope thick with printed photos. April glanced around, then slipped through the door, making her way past officers with a practiced nod. At Daniel's office, she tapped quietly before pushing inside. Daniel looked up, surprised. "Hey, April, everything okay?" April nodded, setting her envelope on the desk. "I took these, from my window. I thought maybe they'd help." Daniel opened the envelope and thumbed through the photos. Grainy shots of men in dark coats moving boxes at night, trucks pulling up to boarded buildings, unfamiliar faces exchanging envelopes in shadowed doorways. One photo showed Charles Oxley himself, a man in his late 50s, sharp-featured with a silver crew cut and ice-cold blue eyes, talking to a group of burly men behind a moving van. Daniel's heart leapt. "April, these are incredible." Bernard turned, impressed. "How did you get all these?" April shrugged, cheeks pink. "I'm quiet, and people forget to look up." Bernard smiled, a real smile, not the hollow kind of the past. "You're braver than you know." April grinned, her pride glowing. She glanced at Rex, who gave her a soft bark and nudged her hand with his nose. "Rex likes you," Daniel said. "He's a good judge of character." April blushed and sat quietly, watching the adults. Daniel decided to start with the building closest to April's home, a rundown block recently emptied, now patrolled by Oxley's security guards. That afternoon, Daniel, Bernard, and Rex walked the perimeter, careful to stay out of sight. Rex led the way, tail low, sniffing for any trace of recent activity. Bernard pointed out a side door where families once entered, now barricaded. "They never fixed the heating," he said softly. "That's why Mrs. Nguyen's kids kept getting sick, but they only cared once the rent went unpaid." As they circled the building, a tall, burly man in a gray windbreaker stepped out to smoke, watching them with suspicion. This was Big Frank Walton, Oxley's head of private security, mid-40s, heavy-set, a long scar running down his jaw. He was known for intimidation and a blank, unreadable face. Daniel tipped his head in greeting, keeping his badge visible. Frank just grunted and tossed his cigarette, stepping back inside, but Daniel felt his eyes on their backs. Inside the building's alley, Bernard found a discarded file folder, muddy but legible. Daniel flipped through it, lists of vacancy incentives, handwritten notes about moving tenants, and a schedule for after-hours maintenance that matched several of April's photos. Bernard's pulse hammered. "This is what I tried to show the city council. They said it was routine, but look, the signatures are all Oxley's or his assistants." Rex barked, startling a trio of rats. Daniel pocketed the file and motioned for everyone to move on. They reconvened at a nearby diner. Bernard nursed a black coffee, his hands shaking only slightly. Daniel laid out everything they'd gathered: April's photos, Bernard's notes, the new folder. "This is enough to open a proper investigation," he said quietly. "But we'll need more." Bernard, energized by the chase, promised to contact 2 former tenants who might be willing to talk. At a corner booth, April worked her way through a grilled cheese sandwich, feeling almost like part of the team. Lisa Johnson. Her mother came in halfway through, still in her waitress uniform, navy polo, black apron, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Lisa was petite, her features gentle but lined with fatigue. She greeted Daniel and Bernard with gratitude and a wary smile, her eyes lingering on the dog who'd become a local legend. "April says you're going to help us." Daniel nodded. "We're going to try." Meanwhile, across town, Charles Oxley sat in his spacious office lined with mahogany and glass, peering at a wall of monitors displaying security feeds from his properties. He was lean, with a fox-like alertness and a voice that could freeze a room. On the couch sat his assistant, Marla Bright, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 30s, always dressed in tailored suits, her voice soft but direct. Oxley tapped the screen, showing Daniel and Bernard near the apartment complex. "Watch them," he ordered, his words thin as ice. Marla nodded, her gaze calculating. Back at the diner, as dusk deepened, Daniel thanked April for her bravery and asked if she'd seen anything else suspicious. April bit her lip, thinking. "I heard them say something about Friday night, moving more boxes maybe." Bernard made a note, eyes alive with new purpose. "That's when they empty the last families out," he said. "We have to act fast." As night fell, Daniel and Bernard returned to the precinct, files in hand, a plan forming. Rex padded beside them, head high. April and her mother walked home together, holding hands in the chilly air, feeling for the first time in months a glimmer of hope. Snow fell thick and fast that evening, swallowing the sounds of Evanston's streets and muffling the glow from porch lamps along Oak Ridge Lane. Daniel Hayes's modest brick house set back from the curb with a peeling blue door and a worn American flag fluttering out front seemed almost peaceful, a tiny island of warmth in the winter dark. Inside, the living room was a patchwork of comfort: old couch, cluttered bookshelf, Rex's battered dog bed beside the radiator, a wall of family photos tracing Daniel's journey from rookie cop to seasoned sergeant. Daniel had lived alone for years since his wife left, but tonight the house was filled with unfamiliar energy. Bernard Carter, fresh from a hot shower, wearing Daniel's oversized sweatpants and a borrowed flannel shirt, sat at the table, sifting through files by lamplight. Bernard's face looked younger in the glow, his beard trimmed, hair combed, shoulders squared with a quiet sense of belonging. Rex lay sprawled at his feet, head up, ears twitching with every creak and shuffle. Daniel, in faded jeans and a gray Henley, moved between the kitchen and living room, making coffee strong enough to banish ghosts. The windows steamed, and the smell of cinnamon toast filled the air. Outside, the wind howled against the eaves. Inside, they reviewed April's photos and the file Bernard had rescued from Oxley's property, building a case that, if it held, could topple a corrupt empire. Daniel's cell phone buzzed. He checked the screen, his brows knotting. "That's the third call from a blocked number tonight," he said quietly. Bernard looked up, a chill passing between them. They tried to ignore the unease. Bernard told stories, some light, some shadowed, about army days and men who never came home, about standing up for tenants, about losing everything except his stubborn hope. Daniel listened, and for the first time Bernard felt the bond of friendship outgrowing the old shame. Rex got up suddenly, pacing to the window. He whined a low warning sound. Daniel followed, parting the curtain. A dark SUV idled across the street, headlights off. Figures moved inside, barely visible through snow-streaked glass. Daniel's heart thudded. "Bernard, stay here. Lock the back door. Call 911 if anything happens. Rex, with me." He kept his voice steady, but Bernard saw the tension in his eyes. Daniel stepped onto the porch, Rex pressed to his side, muscles taut, the cold bit hard. Snow-muffled footsteps behind the fence. Suddenly, two men in dark coats surged from the alley, moving with practiced speed. One swung a crowbar at Daniel, missing by inches. The other lunged for the door. Rex exploded into action, snarling, launching himself between Daniel and the attackers, jaws flashing, eyes wild with determination. The first man stumbled back, shocked by the force of the dog's charge. Rex caught his sleeve, dragging him off balance. The second attacker swung a flashlight, but Rex twisted, teeth bared, unyielding. Bernard heard the chaos, panic flooding him. He remembered fear both on battlefields and on city streets, but this was different. He grabbed the old baseball bat from beside the door and ran to help. Daniel was struggling, one arm pinned, but he saw Bernard and shouted, "Stay back!" Bernard ignored him, swinging the bat with shaking hands. The attackers cursed, realized they were outmatched, and broke away, disappearing into the snow, boots crunching as they fled to the SUV. Daniel called it in. Sirens pierced the night minutes later, blue lights painting the falling snow. 2 squad cars arrived, officers pouring out, among them Officer Pete Rodriguez, Daniel's old friend, short and sturdy with fierce brown eyes and a booming voice that filled the night. Pete clapped Daniel on the back, checked for injuries, and whistled low at Rex's bloody muzzle. "He saved your life, man." Inside, Bernard collapsed into a chair, trembling, adrenaline burning through him. Rex padded over, tail wagging, muzzle flecked with blood but eyes gentle as he nudged Bernard's hand. Daniel crouched next to them, steadying Bernard. "You're safe. You're both safe." Bernard looked at Rex, voice hoarse. He didn't hesitate. "He'd die for you." Daniel nodded. "He would for any of us." The night's ordeal left everyone shaken. After the police took statements and swept the house, Daniel pulled Bernard aside. "They know we're getting close. You can't blame yourself. They want you scared and silent, but we're not letting that happen." Bernard gripped Daniel's shoulder. "Not anymore," he said quietly. "No more running." Meanwhile, across town, April Johnson and her mother Lisa packed in a hurry, hands shaking as they stuffed clothes and keepsakes into an old gym bag. Earlier that evening, a yellow envelope had been shoved under their door. "Leave now or else." Lisa, her face tight with fear, called Daniel. He arrived within minutes, helped them into his truck, and drove them through snow-choked back streets to the home of Judith Morrow, the veteran's advocate. Judith, tall and strong in a turtleneck and corduroys, opened her door wide, ushering them inside with the calm authority of someone who'd survived worse. Her house was filled with books and the faint smell of sage, walls hung with photos of marches, medals, and smiling families. She made tea, settled April and Lisa in the spare room, and promised, "No one will hurt you here." April, clutching Rex's old collar gifted to her by Daniel for courage, finally drifted into sleep. Back on Oak Ridge Lane, as midnight passed, Daniel and Bernard sat in the kitchen, sharing coffee in silence. Bernard gazed at Rex, his eyes wet. "All these years I thought loyalty meant dying for something. Maybe it means living for something too." Daniel smiled, understanding. "You can still fight, just not alone." The cold outside the SUV had vanished, but inside, beneath the warmth and the scars, hope flickered, a stubborn, living thing. By sunrise, word of last night's attack had already traveled through Evanston's narrow streets and crowded apartments. Daniel Hayes was back at the police precinct before dawn, eyes gritty, heart pounding with resolve. The small conference room was a blur of paperwork, police radios, and the hum of old fluorescent lights. Bernard Carter, freshly shaven and in borrowed khakis and a dark blue sweater, stood beside Daniel at the head of a battered table, documents and photographs spread before them. Rex paced the room, alert and restless, picking up on the tension. He paused at the door as more officers entered. Pete Rodriguez, still sturdy and wide-shouldered in his uniform, his usual grin replaced by a grave look. Detective Maria Hernandez, tall and wiry, with close-cropped black hair and dark eyes sharp with intelligence, she was new to the team, known for her cool head under pressure and relentless pursuit of truth. Maria nodded to Bernard, her posture upright, her handshake firm. "Heard you raised hell last night. Ready for the next round?" Bernard managed a half smile. "As ready as I'll ever be." Across town, Judith Morrow prepared breakfast for her guests. April Johnson, wearing an oversized hoodie and pajama pants decorated with cartoon dogs, sat at the kitchen table surrounded by paper, markers, and 3 other kids from the neighborhood. There was Sammy, a round-faced 8-year-old with a love for superheroes and a talent for drawing city skylines. Brianna, 11, tall for her age, brown-skinned, and soft-spoken, with neat braids and careful eyes. And her little brother Terrence, a whirlwind of nervous energy at 6. Judith, her silver hair pulled back, frame tall and strong, set out toast and apple slices, encouraging them to make something bright. The world needs it. April's idea was simple: giant posters and colorful banners calling for fairness, kindness, and for people to stand together. Back at the station, Daniel called a press conference, inviting not just reporters from the Evanston Gazette, but also a crew from Channel 4 News and a blogger known for covering local corruption. The room quickly filled with journalists, cameras, and skeptical faces. At the last minute, Lisa Johnson slipped in with Judith. Lisa's hair was newly brushed, but worry lined her face. She hugged April tight, whispering that she was proud. Daniel began, his voice calm but carrying. "We are here today because our community deserves the truth." He turned the podium over to Bernard. Cameras flashed. Bernard's hands shook, but Rex nudged him, steadying. "My name is Bernard Carter," he said, his voice clear, carrying the gravity of a man who had lost and found himself. "I am a veteran, a former property manager, and a witness to crimes that have hurt too many families." He laid out the evidence: April's photographs, documents from the property files, signed orders from Charles Oxley and his assistant Marla Bright, accounts from displaced tenants. Maria Hernandez presented supporting statements from residents, her voice unwavering. The evidence was irrefutable: a pattern of fraud, illegal evictions, and intimidation aimed at low-income families. Just as the room grew quiet, a reporter from Channel 4 asked, "Mr. Carter, aren't you just a disgruntled ex-employee with a drinking problem?" The question hit like a slap. Bernard looked at Daniel, then at April in the back row, who clenched her fist around her marker. "Yes, I lost my way for a time," Bernard answered, "but it was because I couldn't save people I promised to protect. Today, with the help of my friends in this city, I choose to stand up again. I will not be silenced." The press conference ended with a flurry of questions, but the evidence had been made public. Bernard felt the burden lighten, if only a little, but danger was not gone. Within hours, Oxley's lawyers filed a defamation suit. Bloggers sympathetic to the landlords published rumors about Bernard's past, claiming he'd stolen funds and fabricated documents. Channel 4 aired a segment questioning police bias and hinting at a personal vendetta. Even Daniel's phone rang off the hook: reporters, anonymous threats, and calls from Oxley's office warning him to drop it before someone gets hurt. Amidst the chaos, April's campaign bloomed. She led her small group through the neighborhood, taping hand-painted signs to doors, lampposts, and the windows of the diner. "This is our home. No more bullies. Stand together, stay strong." She organized a gathering in the tiny park on Maple Street, where kids chalked hearts and slogans on the cracked pavement. Brianna read a poem about hope. Sammy drew a huge picture of Rex with a cape, and Terrence marched in circles, waving a cardboard flag. Adults, at first wary, began to smile, then to gather. Judith talked quietly with neighbors about their rights. Lisa handed out cocoa and reassured anxious parents. Even Bernard, stepping out for air after the press conference, found himself surrounded by kids who wanted to pet Rex and hear about the real hero dog. Bernard knelt, smiling as Rex soaked up the affection, tail wagging. But the pushback was swift. That night, graffiti appeared on the walls of the community center. "Traitor, liar, get out." Maria Hernandez and Pete Rodriguez responded, scrubbing it clean before sunrise. Lisa found a nasty note tucked under her windshield wiper. Bernard's social media was flooded with threats and lies. But Rex kept watch at Daniel's door, a living reminder that courage wasn't about the absence of fear, but about holding your ground. As dusk settled over Evanston, Daniel, Bernard, and Maria gathered at Judith's house, surrounded by April's banners and the laughter of children. Daniel poured coffee, voice low. "They're scared. That means we're close." Bernard glanced at Rex, who lay on the rug, content, eyes bright. "I'm scared too," Bernard admitted. Maria clapped him on the shoulder. "Good. That means you still care." Outside, April looked at her friends, holding up their biggest banner yet. "No one gets left behind." For the first time, the neighborhood felt like it was fighting back, not just for justice, but for each other. Morning broke with a pale, silver sunlight that softened the battered edges of Evanston. The overnight snow had finally stopped, leaving the city glazed with a deceptive calm, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Inside the old community center, a squat brick building at the heart of the neighborhood, the mood was electric. Neighbors streamed in, stamping snow from boots, filling the hall with the low thrum of hope and nerves. Daniel Hayes stood at the back of the room, uniform crisp, his jaw freshly shaved for the occasion. Next to him sat Bernard Carter, hands clasped tightly, the dark blue sweater lending his lean frame a sense of quiet dignity. Maria Hernandez and Pete Rodriguez kept to the sides, their watchful gazes a silent promise of protection. At Daniel's feet, Rex lay calm but vigilant, thick black and tan fur pressed to the linoleum, ears flicking at every sound. The mayor of Evanston, Sylvia Brooks, was hard to miss. A tall black woman in her early 50s, with a regal bearing and a kind, serious face framed by silver-threaded hair. She wore a deep green suit and moved through the crowd with a purposeful grace, stopping to shake hands and listen. Sylvia's reputation was one of fierce integrity, but she was cautious. Her trust, like her votes, had to be earned. She took the stage and called the meeting to order, her voice steady, warm, but firm. "We are here because this community deserves answers, and today you will have them." She introduced Maria Hernandez, who presented the findings of the investigation, April's photographs, Bernard's testimony, Daniel's reports, and statements from neighbors. The evidence was projected on a cracked pull-down screen, one slide after another, legal documents, photographs of midnight evictions, copies of threatening notes. There was no room left for doubt. As the evidence built, a hush fell over the hall. Charles Oxley and his assistant Marla were present, sitting stiffly near the back, Oxley's sharp-featured face drawn and pale, Marla's normally poised demeanor marred by a nervous twitch at the corner of her mouth. They listened in silence, their body language shifting from arrogance to discomfort, then finally to dread. Halfway through the meeting, the mayor addressed the crowd. "The city has begun an emergency audit of all properties connected to the accused. Effective immediately, all pending evictions are suspended, and a full criminal inquiry will proceed." Murmurs rippled through the room, some relieved, some angry, all changed by the news. Bernard, who had been holding his breath for weeks, let out a shaky sigh and squeezed Daniel's shoulder. Maria smiled at April, who sat in the second row beside her mother, Lisa, cheeks flushed with excitement and nerves. Then came the moment no one expected. Mayor Brooks invited anyone with something to say to step forward. For a moment, silence hung, thick and heavy. Then April, hands shaking, stood up. She wore her best dress blue with little white flowers and clutched Rex's old collar in her hands. She climbed onto the step stool set beside the podium, heart pounding. "My name is April Johnson," she began, her voice trembling at first, then growing stronger. "I know I'm just a kid, but my mom and me, we almost lost our home. We were scared, but we weren't alone." She looked at the mayor, then at the crowd. "I took pictures because I saw bad things happening to my neighbors, and I didn't want anyone else to feel invisible. But the bravest one here is Rex." She glanced down at the dog, who wagged his tail, eyes soft. "He saved people. He keeps us safe. He reminds us to never give up." April paused, breathless, then raised her chin. "Please don't let anyone else get hurt. Stand together. Believe in each other." The room was silent, a silence full of awe. Then applause, hesitant at first, then swelling. Bernard blinked back tears. Even Mayor Brooks smiled, stepping forward to embrace April. Thank you for reminding us why we fight." After the meeting, the news spread like fire. Channel 4 aired live coverage. Local papers ran headlines. Corruption unmasked. Community fights back. Social media buzzed with videos of April's speech and photos of Rex surrounded by kids in the snowy street. The city hotline for tenant complaints lit up, and City Hall was flooded with calls demanding reform. Meanwhile, the adults gathered in the center's kitchen: Maria, Daniel, Bernard, Lisa, Judith, and others talking in low, hopeful voices about next steps. Judith, calm and strong in her navy sweater and jeans, promised to help families find new leases. Lisa offered to cook meals for those in need. Bernard, no longer a ghost in his own life, stood by the window, watching the world wake up with a new sense of purpose. Outside, children played in the snow, tracing "Thank you, Rex" in crooked letters on the fence. Pete Rodriguez organized a safe walk patrol for evenings. Maria and Daniel coordinated with city legal teams, and neighbors who'd once eyed each other warily now exchanged stories, laughter, and plans for a community garden in the spring. As twilight descended, Bernard found April and her mother near the playground. April grinned, hugging him fiercely. "You're a hero too," she whispered. Bernard smiled, but shook his head. "We all are, every single one of us who didn't give up." He knelt to pet Rex, who leaned into his hand, sighing contentedly. The winds of change had come, sharp, cleansing, full of promise. For the first time in a long while, Evanston felt like home again. Dawn broke soft and golden over Evanston, painting the rooftops in pale honey and driving the long shadows of winter into gentle retreat. There was a feeling of celebration in the air, part relief, part disbelief, and all gratitude. On Main Street, new banners fluttered from the lampposts. "Community Matters," "Thank you, Rex," and beneath the window of the old community center, a mural had begun to take shape. Children, neighbors, and Rex himself, tail high, surrounded by bright splashes of color and hope. Inside the community center's sunlit main hall, the scent of cinnamon rolls and strong coffee mingled with laughter. Daniel Hayes stood at the refreshment table in a fresh uniform, but he looked lighter, his posture relaxed and his eyes finally free of the burden he'd carried for months. Rex trotted at his side, his fur shining, a new collar with a silver hero tag hanging from it, surrounded by a cluster of neighborhood children who took turns hugging him or braiding little ribbons into his thick coat. He bore it all with patient dignity, occasionally sneaking a paw to the snack table when he thought no one was looking. Bernard Carter arrived with Judith Morrow. Bernard's transformation was visible to all. He'd gained weight, stood taller, and his eyes had a new light. His hair was cut neatly, beard trimmed close, and he wore a collared shirt with clean khakis, his first new clothes in years. There was an easy warmth in his handshake, a sense of presence that made people turn toward him when he spoke. Judith, ever the advocate, walked at his side, her sturdy frame in a forest green sweater, her arm looped through Bernard's with pride. Bernard took the stage to scattered applause. He cleared his throat and smiled, pausing to look out over the packed hall. Neighbors, friends, officers, children, even Mayor Sylvia Brooks, poised and elegant in a violet suit, who nodded in encouragement. "Thank you," Bernard began. "Not just for giving me another chance, but for giving our community back its voice. I lost myself for a long time, but all of you, helped me find my way again." He glanced at Rex, who barked softly as if in approval. Courage doesn't always look like fighting. Sometimes it's letting people help you up. Daniel joined Bernard, resting a hand on his friend's shoulder. Mayor Brooks presented the town's highest civilian award, a golden pin shaped like a rising sun, to Daniel, Bernard, and to Rex, who wore his medal with humble, tongue-lolling joy. Cameras flashed, Channel 4 filmed the moment, and the applause rolled on and on. Meanwhile, April Johnson clung to her mother Lisa in the front row. Lisa, her gentle face glowing with tears, had just received news that the city would help cover their back rent. The Johnsons would keep their apartment. The threat of eviction was finally gone. April herself bounced with pride. She'd brought Rex's old collar, now decorated with beads and a hand-painted tag that read, "Best Friend." After the ceremony, Daniel crouched to her level. "You know, Rex could use a little more adventure on weekends. Would you like to be his official buddy?" April's mouth dropped open. Then she squealed and hugged both Daniel and Rex at once. "I promise I'll take care of him, and brush him, and feed him treats, not too many though," Rex barked, licking her cheek in approval, and the children cheered. From that day on, every Saturday, April, armed with a leash and endless curiosity, became Rex's little boss. They explored parks, visited neighbors, and volunteered at the community garden, where Rex chased butterflies and supervised the tomato beds. Lisa sometimes joined, her heart lighter, her steps surer, always pausing to thank Daniel and Bernard for what they'd done. Elsewhere, Bernard took up a new post at the community center teaching job skills workshops and helping veterans navigate city services. He spoke honestly about his past, the darkness of despair, and the miracle of second chances. People listened. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid him now greeted him warmly, asking for advice or simply stopping to chat. With Judith's support, Bernard launched a mentorship group for kids like April, mixing old stories with lessons in resilience and hope. The town's paper ran a Sunday feature, A City Reborn, How a Cop, a Dog, and a Veteran Changed Everything. The mural outside the center kept growing, fueled by April and her friends. It became a living reminder, a German shepherd leaping beneath a sky full of children's dreams, a neighborhood gathered in a circle, hands linked, faces upturned toward the dawn. One chilly morning, Daniel and Bernard walked through the market, Rex at their heels. Bernard carried a box of donated books for the center's reading room, stopping now and then to chat with shopkeepers. "Strange, isn't it?" Bernard said quietly. "After all the battles, peace almost feels fragile." Daniel grinned, nudging his friend. "That's why we keep building it day by day." He bent to scratch Rex behind the ears. "And we've got the best watchdog in the county." Later, as the sun set in a sky streaked with gold, the community center glowed with music and warmth. Daniel, Bernard, Rex, April, and Lisa gathered on the steps, joined by neighbors who had become friends and strangers who'd become family. April leaned against Bernard, clutching Rex's leash. "Do you think it will always be like this?" she asked, voice hopeful. Bernard looked at Daniel, then at the bright eyes of the children, at the new leaves budding in window boxes, at the mural alive with light. "Maybe not always easy," he answered. "But as long as we look out for each other, yeah, I think it just might." Night settled softly over Evanston. The battles were not forgotten, but they had given birth to something stronger than fear, a community awake and alive, building their own sunrise, together. Sometimes miracles don't look like lightning from the sky or voices in the thunder. Sometimes they arrive quietly in a loyal dog's eyes, in the courage of a child, or in the outstretched hand of a neighbor who refuses to give up. Perhaps that is how God works among us, through kindness, through second chances, through the love and hope we offer one another, even when the world seems dark. As you finish this story, remember that every day holds the chance for a new beginning. You don't have to change the whole world to be a miracle in someone's life. Sometimes, all it takes is listening, helping, or standing up for what is right, no matter how small that act may seem. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone you care about. Leave a comment below, tell us your thoughts, your prayers, or your own story of hope. And if you believe that miracles still happen, if you believe God is working in the quiet moments, subscribe to our channel to help us spread more stories like this. Type Amen in the comments if you believe that God still blesses those who choose kindness. May God bless you and your family, today and always.